And the people who thought about it were like, yeah, there's something like this, and other ones would be like, well, there was that time, you know, so it was very clear.
So you had a really positive experience.
I had a very light priming experience where I asked them to think about it instead of a very like.
Just as a journalist, you know, like journalists prime all the time, you know, and I think it's something you have to do. Otherwise, you know, the person that you're interviewing may not be focused on what you want to talk about right away. So you can do a lot of priming without introducing bias, I think. Topics of the interview will cover X, Y, Z. That introduces very little bias, but it gets them really thinking about specific issues or questions. So you can kind of front load the answers if you want or weight them, but I don't think it's inherent in priming at all.
Kind of since a lot of times I was walking in and sometimes people I was interviewing didn't know ahead of time that was planned at all, so there was no chance for anything like priming. What I often found was that I would start by asking kind of questions at the beginning of the interview, and then sort of later on in the interview, once they'd kind of gotten warmed up, I'd just ask the same question again. So I guess in that way, it's sort of the same thing. So I kind of would use like the first 10, 15 minutes of the interview as kind of just warm up, and then just sort of throw everything out from what happened then. And then sort of once people got talking, then the real meat of it came.
I had a wide range. I had people in my first 2 interviews were like, so get to the point, man. What do you want to hear about? So, you know, which is in the reading, the P210 reading, where they're like, the guy's like, so, like, really, what do you want to talk about? So that got me a little more sped up into it because I was like, so, who are you? Who am I? Let's talk. And then they're like, dude, get to the point. And then with other people, I had to learn how to cut. Basically, like, I had people going way off the train tracks telling me war stories from Afghanistan, and I had to pull them in and be like, whoa, so tell me about that meeting you mentioned. And they're telling me, like, and then this happened, and I'm like, okay, let's, you know, without mentally tuning out, like, all right. You notice my pen isn't writing anymore. So, anyways. And just for clarity, the Army concurred with Tufts IRB approval. So my official approval, that was what the Army officially did, is they concurred with the IRB approval I had gotten here. So there's some sequencing there. If I had gone to the Army first, they couldn't have done that. But I think in the future I'd have to do that because they had this mammoth one.
So where do you actually apply to for military IRB?
That is the key question. That took me a month to figure out.
Okay, could I ask you to send me the contact, so if I get someone else that needs to do it, I'll have it? You can do that?
There are multiple points in the Army to reference.
Okay, well, any information you can send me that would be helpful.
And
great. Thanks.
Would you, I guess maybe I don't know if this is for, but would you have been exempt if you didn't have to do the Army IRB? I mean, it sounds like with subjects, it sounds like maybe you would you qualify for exemption?
Exempt approval.
But did you need to do the IRB? Did you do the full process here, or did you?
No.
Okay. And that's okay with the Army that you had this.
They concurred with my exempt approval.
With the exempt approval. So another question, you mentioned you can't be exempt if you interview prisoners and all other things that made sense to me, and then you hit pregnant women, and it made me want to, like,
yeah,
does that mean you
obviously, no. It means if your study is about 600 pregnant women, no.
Oh, okay.
If you happen to in your interview come across someone who's
it
pregnant,
doesn't mean I can't like get somewhere and find out
That's
somebody's
fine.
pregnant and say, oh, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you.
And in some cases, you can make the case for 15 or 16-year-olds being heads of household in some developing countries, mainly, and you can make the case that they are adults. So,
It's that the subject of your study can't be pregnant women or prisoners or something. But could you interview a random prisoner?
Well, it can be,
but you have to go through.
You do the exact process.
You have to do the exam too.
Prisoners who are women who.
I'm not, but I'm just thinking.
All right.
Get there for the opportunities.
Okay, any more questions to Mike or Laura? Or this? Okay, Rebecca.
Okay. A lot of the points that people resonated with me a lot, so I guess I'll be brief and if anybody has questions.
Can you enunciate? I find it hard to hear. I may not be the only one, but.
A lot of the things that people said resonated with me, so I'll be brief, and if you have questions, you can ask me now or later, obviously. So I guess I'll talk, I did field research this past summer, and I also did some field research the summer before that. I'm going to talk about the summer before that, which was an independent research project that I did about harmful social practice known as breast ironing or breast flattening in Cameroon. So I had all of those IR IRB was rejected the first time around, which was very stressful. So if anybody has to do a full IRB, etc., again, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. In the end, it was approved. So I was working with Plan Cameroon on a different project, and then I spent a month in a different village doing research. And that was helpful because Plan was able to introduce me to some people in the community. I didn't have any, it was the first time I'd ever been to Cameroon. I didn't have any personal connections that helped me, but association with Plan was very helpful, especially because people thought of them as a positive organization, people had good associations with the organization. And so if I was able to say, I'm an American student and I, am associated with Plan, that facilitated my relationships with people. And they also introduced me to sort of the local administration, government officials who supported the research sort of in an official capacity, but also was somewhat helpful. And the idea was to snowball sampling, in fact, to try to find people to talk to, which didn't work very well. It would be interesting actually to hear about some people who use snowballing that worked well. But what I found happened was the prevalence of the practice was supposed to be about 18% in the area that I was working in. And it's something that mothers do to their daughters, and it's not, people who don't do it don't know about it at all. They'll be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. We absolutely don't do that here. That sounds horrible and ridiculous, and I can't believe it. And then you talk to the person next door, and she's like, oh yeah, of course I do that to my daughter, obviously. So it was really, anybody who you talked to who didn't do it could not point you to somebody who did. And even people who did do it might be like, oh yeah, my aunt told me about it, but right now she's in some other village, or she's at the farm, I don't know what to do that. It's really difficult to locate people. They moved a lot, and also it's a practice that only happens to people for a short period of time in their lives. So that's cool. And then also it was difficult to talk to girls because they're obviously a much more sensitive population, and it was harder to find them. They were working. They weren't around for me to sort of run into and meet. So I ended up talking mostly to women who were maybe 30 or something about something that had happened to them quite a while ago. What else? My interviews were really open-ended. So again, I guess this is a sensitive topic. A lot of I tell people where I was going, what I want to talk to them about. But a lot of the conversation would be sort of building rapport. I tried to be really friendly and really non-judgmental. I did have a lot of conversations, my suburb people would tell me about how their husband died and when they had an accident and their son who moved to England. It was
off topic.
Well, right, but at the same time, it did give me a good sense of what the lives of the people who have this experience are really like and where it fits in. And something that was very interesting to me was that people very often would tell me something and be trying to dig for sort of more details, and then sort of look at me and be like, why are you asking me about this weird thing that happened to me 3 times in my life 10 years ago? It's really not applicable to me. I'm worried about poverty and all these other things. And I was like, okay. But it was interesting. Other things, I did probably maybe 2 or 3 interviews a day with whoever I could find. So sometimes it would be people who didn't experience practice, or with men, or I just walk down the road and see who I could find. The local government was helpful in that they helped identify some key people in the community who I would have focus groups with, teachers or youth group leaders. And then the idea was that they would point me towards other people who didn't really work.
Go ahead. Yep.
What were you trying to find out about it?
So sorry, I didn't give much background on this practice, but basically, there's nothing academic written about breast flattening or breast ironing, and almost nothing non-academic. There are some articles, and so the idea literally was just to sort of document what people do and why they do it, and people are new, and
So just being descriptive about the practice.
basically.
And an anthropological description.
Yeah, kind
Sure. Yeah. How did you deal with privacy? Like, you're walking down the street and you're like, hey, do you want to talk to me about this? And then let's go somewhere where, I mean, how did
It
you?
didn't end up being that. I was worried about that being the issue, and it just sort of wasn't. I talked to people in their homes.
But then other family members were around or not? Did it
No.
matter to you? Did you were you over whispering about some of this?
I mean, I just tried to sort of follow people's feelings. People weren't really secretive, or, I one time was in the market square, and this guy was like, you need to bring this practice back to America. And everybody, it's just wasn't so. That was one interesting thing about my IRB is that people were really like, this is so sensitive, but
there.
So are you going to bring it to America?
yeah, so next week we'll have a class.
We'll do a clinic.
I've found, I've never done research on sensitive topics like that, but certainly trying to do individual interviews, sometimes you just have to give up on that. But sometimes the whole crowd wants to come and I'll chat right there. And, I felt like sometimes my interviews turned into focus groups. I think by the time you get 10 people all contributing to the interview,
Not an individual interview
you're
anymore.
not doing an interview anymore. But sometimes it was interesting to watch how people would kind of build off of each other. And you get people who are really shy, who you might not have been able to have an individual interview with, would chime in to kind of this informal group interview. So I kind of just didn't stress about it, but I wasn't talking about sensitive topics, so a little different.
I would say too, even when the topic is relatively cut and dried, I still found that people wanted to tell me about a lot of stuff that didn't really have anything to do with the question I asked, or it took them a long time to get around to answering that question. And in many cultures, you're expected to listen to that whole preamble because in the view of the interviewee, it's really important for you to hear that and important for them to share that. Maybe they don't care about you hearing it, but they certainly care about sharing it. And this could be, with some very sort of formal military people as well as, people who weren't necessarily in the military, and with questions that I thought were relatively simple and straightforward. On the flip side, I noticed too in interviewing people in an institution, I'm not sure if Mike had this experience, but certainly interviewing everybody in the military, you begin to hear a little bit of the party line, right? The story that you're supposed to be hearing, especially me in a country that's going through a significant reform of the military. All the officers in the high command have this couple paragraphs that they trot out for every single person that asks them about this process or anything remotely related to this process. So part of the time I spent was then I was able to go back maybe to a question that I asked earlier in the interview and then get something a little different in terms of a response, because I got away from the formulaic answer given earlier and was able to then focus on a particular aspect that was of more interest to me. So I found I did 5 was my top number in a day, and you just realize that people sometimes don't, you say an hour, I'll take no more than an hour of your time, and an hour and a half later they're still talking and you're like, really, I know you have to go. I need to go. I need to move on.
I set my iPhone with a timer. That way it would buzz and be like, oh, I have to go now. So that was just my time.
For me, it didn't work too well in that cultural context. I kind of had to it ended when they were ready for it to be over in some ways. And that I'd asked all my questions. They were certainly, everybody was more than willing to let me ask all my questions. Even when I visited people in their offices, they weren't super strict on, just took as long as it took. So, anyway.
A lot of people in offices have a lot of time.
I know. Exactly.
Good. All right. Well, thanks to the presenters today, and we'll see you all next Wednesday.
Thanks.
Now, next Wednesday is the comps panel, right?
No, we have a lot going on next week. Well, okay, tonight, just a reminder, tonight, for those of you that signed up, we have the evening seminar. Courtney Richardson's going to be talking about how to apply for pre-docs and postdocs. Next Monday is the comps panel. Please bring your own lunch. We'll supply dessert and drinks. So that's in C102 at 12:30 on Monday, comps panel. We have 3 or 4 people presenting. Next Wednesday will be regular PhD colloquium here.
So there's a few people for the Monday.
At what